Kanye West walked into the View studio like he always walked into rooms, not performing confidence but simply possessing it, the specific kind that does not announce itself because it does not need to. He sat down across from Joy Behar and the room felt it immediately. Not a threat. Not aggression. Something quieter and more difficult to name. The specific weight of a person who has decided before entering the building exactly how much of themselves they are willing to give to what is about to happen and who has set that number considerably lower than the people running the program were hoping for. Joy Behar smiled. The smile was genuine in the way that Joy Behar's smiles are always genuine, which is to say it was real, and it was also the smile of a woman who had been doing this for 30 years and who understood that the warmth at the beginning of a conversation like this was not just courtesy but architecture, the foundation on which everything that came after it would stand or fall. She said it was great to have him. He said thank you. The audience applauded. The cameras moved between their faces. Everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to look. And underneath the looking exactly the way it was supposed to look, something was already building. Something that the audience could feel in the specific and wordless way that audiences feel things that have not yet become visible on the surface of a conversation but that are moving toward the surface with the specific and inevitable momentum of something that was always going to arrive. The first question was about the music. This was how these things always started. The music was the safe ground, the established territory, the place where everyone in the room could agree because the music was beyond argument for anyone who had actually listened to it with the attention it deserved. He answered about the music the way he always answered about the music, which was seriously and completely, without the hedge and the qualification and the careful management of his own image that most celebrities brought to discussions of their work, without the performed humility that said I was just trying to make something good and I hope people like it. Without the distance between the person and the work that most public figures maintain to protect themselves from the vulnerability of having made something that mattered to them and put it in front of the world. He talked about the music like it was his, completely and without apology, like a man who had put everything he had into something and knew the value of what he had made and was not going to pretend otherwise out of politeness. The audience liked this. You could feel them leaning toward him slightly, the specific lean of people who are being given something real rather than something constructed. Joy let it settle for exactly long enough. Then she asked about the statements. Not the statements in the abstract. Specific statements. Things that had been said publicly, on camera, in interviews, on social media, in the specific and indelible record that the modern world keeps of everything public figures say in public contexts. She named them. Not all of them. Enough of them. Enough to make clear that she had done her preparation, that this was not a casual curiosity but a deliberate engagement, that she had thought about what she was going to ask and had arrived at the decision to ask it through a process that had nothing casual or accidental in it. She named enough of them to make the room very quiet very quickly. The quiet that fell over the studio in the seconds after Joy Behar named the statements was a specific kind of quiet. Not the quiet of shock, though there was some shock in it. Not the quiet of discomfort, though there was considerable discomfort in it. The quiet of a room full of people who understood simultaneously that something real was happening, that the professional surface of the interview had cracked and something underneath the surface was now visible, and who were not sure yet whether what was underneath the surface was something they wanted to see or something they were going to have to sit with regardless of whether they wanted to see it. The audience held their collective breath. The co-hosts held theirs. The cameras kept moving. Joy Behar waited with the specific patience of a woman who has asked the question and is now genuinely interested in what the answer is going to be, who is not performing interest but actually experiencing it. Kanye looked at her. The look lasted slightly longer than looks usually last in television conversations, where the rhythm of exchange is fast and the silence between statement and response is usually compressed to the minimum that professional courtesy requires. He looked at her for long enough that the extra beats of silence became themselves a thing, became part of what was happening, became the first indication to everyone in the room that what they were watching was not going to proceed on the usual schedule of the format. He was thinking. Not performing thinking. Actually thinking. processing the question against something internal that had its own complexity and its own history and its own relationship to everything the question was touching, arriving at the answer through a process that was not the process of finding the diplomatic middle ground or the carefully prepared talking point, but the process of actually determining what he was going to say. He said he understood why people were upset. He said he understood the impact of certain words in certain communities and the specific weight that those words carried and the specific damage that they could cause when they were deployed in public by someone with a platform the size of his. He said this not as an apology and not as a recantation and not as the performed version of accountability that public figures sometimes produce when they have been cornered into addressing something they would prefer not to address, but as an actual acknowledgement of something real. The audience exhaled slightly. The co-hosts moved slightly. Joy Behar's expression changed slightly. Not softened. Recalibrated. She had expected several things from him, and this was not among the things she had expected, this specific and genuine quality of acknowledgement, and the not expecting it required her to adjust the position she had been holding in preparation for the conversation. But he was not done. The acknowledgement was real, and it was also not the end of what he was saying. It was the beginning of what he was saying. It was the foundation on which what he was actually going to say was about to be built. And what he was actually going to say was considerably more complicated than the acknowledgement had suggested it might be, was the thing that the acknowledgement had been preface to rather than conclusion of, was the position underneath the position that the room had briefly thought might be simple but that was now revealing itself to be something else entirely. He said he believed things that he believed. He said the believing of them had not changed because of the response to them. He said the response to them had been, in certain respects, evidence of the things he believed rather than refutation of them. The room went quiet again. This time differently. Joy Behar leaned forward. This was the specific physical signal that people who had watched her long enough had learned to recognize as the signal that something was about to be said directly, that the diplomatic phase of the conversation had concluded and the actual phase of the conversation was beginning. She leaned forward and she said that she wanted to understand how someone with his intelligence and his awareness and his demonstrated understanding of the impact that words could continue to hold positions that had caused the kind of harm that these positions had caused. She said it without cruelty and without performance. She said it as a genuine question from someone who was genuinely confused, genuinely unable to construct the bridge between what she knew about his mind and what she knew about his positions, genuinely wanting the explanation that would make the two things cohere. The studio was absolutely silent. He did not answer immediately. He looked at her for another of those long beats that had by now established their own rhythm in the conversation, their own specific quality of meaning that was separate from the silence of hesitation or the silence of hostility, and that was instead the silence of someone who was deciding how completely to say the thing they were about to say, who was measuring the room and the cameras and the specific quality of the moment against the specific quality of what they were holding inside and determining whether this was the place and the moment for the full version of it. He decided. You could see the decision arrive in his face the way decisions sometimes arrive visibly in faces when the person making the decision is not managing their expression for the camera but simply making the decision and letting the face do what faces do when decisions are being made. He decided and then he spoke. What he said was not what Joy Behar had been expecting. It was not what the audience had been expecting. It was not what the production team, watching from the control room with the specific anxiety of people who understood that something was happening that they had not prepared for, had been expecting. He said something that was not a defense of the positions and was not a recantation of them but was something more difficult and more interesting than either, something that engaged with Joy Behar's question at the level at which she had actually asked it rather than at the level at which most people responded to such questions, which was the level of the prepared statement and the managed message and the careful pivot away from anything that might generate additional controversy. He engaged with the question about intelligence and awareness and impact, and he engaged with it seriously, and he said things that were difficult to dismiss and also difficult to entirely accept, and that left the room in the specific and slightly vertiginous state of a conversation that has revealed something real and that everyone in the conversation is now trying to figure out what to do with. Joy Behar listened. She listened with the full attention that she brought to things that surprised her, the attention of someone who had asked a question expecting one kind of answer and received another kind, and who was now genuinely processing the received answer rather than simply waiting for the space to deliver the response she had prepared for the answer she had expected. The co-hosts at the table were similarly in a state of genuine engagement rather than the performed engagement of daytime television, their expressions having that specific quality that expressions have when the brain behind them is actually working rather than simply navigating a professional situation. The audience was silent with the specific silence of people who are collectively in the presence of something they did not anticipate and are not sure how to categorize. And then Joy Behar pushed. Not because the answer had satisfied her. Not because the answer had resolved anything. Because the answer had opened something rather than closing it, had revealed the edge of a position that she wanted to see the full extent of, had made the conversation more interesting rather than less, and had made her more rather than less determined to follow it wherever it was going, regardless of whether following it there was comfortable for anyone in the room, including herself. She pushed with the specific and determined quality of a woman who has been doing this long enough to understand that the most important conversations are almost always the ones that are the most uncomfortable, that the thing worth saying is almost always the thing that generates the most resistance to being said. That the job she had taken and had been doing for 30 years was the job of saying those things and not backing down from the saying of them when the person across from her found the saying of them difficult to receive. She pushed. She said the thing that she had been holding since the beginning of the conversation, the thing that all the build-up had been preparing for, the thing that the warmth of the welcome and the patience of the listening and the genuine quality of the engagement with his answers had been the preface to rather than the substance of. She said it directly. She said it without decoration or diplomatic softening or any of the rhetorical devices that could have made it easier to hear. She said it the way Joy Behar said the things that mattered, which was clearly and completely and without apology for the clarity and the completeness. The room changed. Not visibly. Not loudly. The way rooms change when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, when the air in the room has been rearranged by a specific combination of words delivered at a specific moment to a specific person who has a specific relationship to those words that the rest of the people in the room cannot fully know or access but can feel in the specific and wordless way that human beings feel the weight of things said to other human beings in their presence. Kanye West heard what Joy Behar said. Everyone in the room heard him hear it. Not because of anything dramatic that happened in his face or his body in the immediate seconds after the words landed. Because of something that happened in those seconds that was the absence of drama, the specific and telling quality of a person who has heard something that has touched something real and who is not going to perform a reaction to it but is going to have the actual reaction, which sometimes looks from the outside like nothing at all and which is in fact the thing that the drama is always pretending to be. He was quiet for a moment. The moment was longer than the previous moments of silence in the conversation, longer by enough that the production team in the control room exchanged the specific looks that production teams exchange when a segment is moving into territory that was not in the rundown. The audience held their breath again, this time with a different quality to the holding, a quality that was less anticipatory and more protective, the breath holding of people who sensed that something was about to happen and who were not sure whether what was about to happen was something they wanted to witness or whether they would have chosen, if choosing were available, to be somewhere else. The co-hosts at the table went very still. Whoopi, who had the most experience at this table with the specific quality of moments that were about to exceed the parameters of the format, went still with the particular quality of stillness that comes from someone who has decided to let something happen rather than to intervene in it, who has recognized that what is building is beyond the reach of the interventions available to her and who has made the specific and difficult professional decision to be present for it without attempting to manage it. Kanye West looked at Joy Behar. She looked back. The look between them lasted long enough to become a thing of its own, to exist in the room independently of what had preceded it and what was about to follow it, to be the specific and visible evidence of two people who were genuinely in a conversation rather than performing one, who were actually present with each other rather than with the cameras and the audience and the production requirements of the program. In the look was everything that had been built in the preceding minutes of the conversation, every question and every answer and every moment of genuine engagement and every moment of genuine discomfort and the specific and cumulative weight of all of it landing now in this exchange of looks between two people who had arrived at the place that the conversation had always been moving toward. He said it quietly. This was the thing that nobody in the room had expected, the quietness of it. The things that Kanye West said publicly were rarely quiet. They were loud and declarative and delivered with the specific and overwhelming force of a person who believed what he was saying completely and who communicated that completeness through the volume and the certainty of the delivery. This was quiet. The specific and particular quiet of someone who has arrived at the thing they are going to say by a route that cost them something, who is saying it not because it is the thing they want to say but because it is the true thing, and the true thing is the only thing available to them in this specific moment with this specific person in this specific room. He said, "You don't want to keep doing this." He said it to Joy Behar directly and specifically and with the full weight of what had just happened in the room behind the words. He said it the way people say things when they mean them rather than when they are performing the meaning of them, with the specific and slightly frightening quality of genuine quietness that is different from performed quietness, in the same way that genuine calm is different from performed calm, which is the way that things that are real are different from things that are representing reality, which is to say entirely and fundamentally and in ways that the body recognizes before the mind has caught up. Joy Behar heard the warning. You could see that she heard it. Not because she backed down. She did not back down. But because her response to it had a quality that was different from the quality of her previous responses in the conversation, a quality that acknowledged what had just been said to her not by yielding to it but by taking it seriously, by giving it the weight it deserved, by treating it not as an empty gesture but as the thing it was, which was the genuine and specific statement of a person who had reached the edge of what they were willing to give to this conversation. She said she understood that he felt strongly about what he believed. She said she felt strongly about what she believed. She said that was why she was asking these questions. She said it was not personal and it was not an attack and it was not designed to produce a particular response but was the honest engagement of someone who took him seriously enough to ask him the hard questions rather than the easy ones. She said all of this quickly and directly and without the softening that the quietness of his statement might have suggested to her was warranted, because Joy Behar did not soften things on the basis of the emotional temperature of the person she was talking to. She softened things only when the softening was the honest response to the situation, and the honest response to this situation was not softness but the specific and respectful directness of someone who believed that the conversation was worth having at this level rather than at a safer one. He stood up. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. With the specific and deliberate quality of someone who has made a decision and is implementing it calmly rather than reactively, who is doing the thing not because an emotion is driving them to it but because a conclusion has been reached and the conclusion requires this. He stood up, and the standing up was itself a statement, was itself the communication of something that the sitting down had been preventing from being fully communicated, which was the determination to not continue, the specific and genuine determination of a person who has decided that the conversation has reached its limit and that continuing it past its limit serves neither the conversation nor the people having it. The producers made sounds. Not words. Sounds. The specific sounds of people who are responsible for a program that is currently doing something the program was not designed to do and who are processing that fact in real time in front of monitors that are showing them every angle of the something that is happening. The audience did not make any sounds. The audience was in the specific state of collective silence that happens when what you are watching has taken you somewhere beyond the usual responses, somewhere that the usual responses feel inadequate to, somewhere that simply requires watching and not yet requiring anything else. He reached for the microphone. The small black clip-on microphone that had been attached to his collar when he sat down, that had been so unremarkable and so purely functional for the preceding minutes of the conversation that nobody had thought about it at all, suddenly became the most significant object in the room. He unclipped it. He did it carefully. He did it with the specific care of someone who is performing an action that is laden with meaning and who wants the meaning to be communicated through the care rather than through urgency or anger, who wants the thing to be understood as a considered decision rather than an impulsive reaction. He held it for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough for the room to fully understand what was happening. And then he placed it on the table. Not threw it. Placed it. The sound it made when it touched the table was small. The impact of the sound was enormous. Joy Behar was looking at him. The look on her face was not the look of someone who had won something. It was not the look of someone who had lost something either. It was the look of someone who was witnessing something that was more complicated than winning or losing, something that required a different category of response than either of those things, something that she was going to have to think about for longer than the segment allowed. She did not reach for a line. Joy Behar, who always had a line, who had spent 30 years in this chair finding the line in every situation that the chair had produced, did not reach for the line. She looked at him. The audience looked at him. The cameras looked at him. He said one more thing before he turned to leave. He said it to the room rather than to Joy Behar specifically, to the cameras and the audience and the people watching at home and the production team in the control room and everyone who would watch this clip in the days and weeks and months after it happened. Everyone who would form opinions about it and argue about those opinions and tell other people about it in the specific and slightly breathless way that people tell other people about things they have witnessed that they cannot quite believe they witnessed. He said that he respected Joy Behar. He said he respected what she did and why she did it and the specific courage it took to do it the way she did it. He said he disagreed with her. He said he thought there were things she did not understand and things she was not willing to understand, and that the not willingness to understand them was not ignorance but choice, was the specific and deliberate choice of someone who had decided what the world was and who was not open to the possibility that the world might be different from what they had decided it was. He said this without anger. He said it with the specific and devastating quality of a man who has been genuinely disappointed by something and who is naming the disappointment not as an accusation but as a fact. Then he turned. And he walked. And the studio watched him walk with the specific and collective silence of people who are present for something they will be talking about for the rest of their lives. Joy Behar watched him go. The co-hosts watched him go. The audience watched him go. The cameras, because cameras on live television always keep rolling regardless of what is happening in front of them, watched him go and recorded the watching and the going and everything that came after the going, which was the silence, the sustained and heavy and completely unmanaged silence of a room that has just witnessed something real. Whoopi spoke first. Not because she had something to say but because she was the person whose job it was to say something when the silence had gone on long enough that the program required words to continue existing as a program rather than as a document of what had just happened. She said they would take a break. She said it the way she said things when the saying of them was necessary rather than natural. The audience exhaled. The production team in the control room began the process of managing the aftermath of something that could not be managed. And Joy Behar sat at the table with her hands folded in front of her and the specific expression on her face of a woman who had asked the question she believed needed to be asked and had received in return something she had not anticipated receiving and who was now in the process of determining what the receiving of it meant. The clip went everywhere it always goes when something real happens on live television, which is everywhere, immediately, with the speed that only things that have genuinely surprised people travel in the modern media environment. People argued about it. They argued about who was right and who was wrong and whether Kanye should have stayed or Joy should have backed off and whether the walk-off was justified and whether the questions were fair and whether the conversation had been honest or performative and every other dimension of the thing that people who care about these things care about and argue about when something like this happens in public. The arguing was itself a tribute to the realness of what had occurred, because people only argue this intensely about things that have touched something genuine, that have made contact with something that matters, that have produced in the people watching not just entertainment but the specific and slightly uncomfortable feeling of having witnessed something that required a response from them. Something that could not simply be consumed and moved past but that demanded the engagement of their actual opinions and their actual values and their actual understanding of the world. Joy Behar said later, in the specific and reflective way that she spoke about things that had affected her after enough time had passed for the reflection to be genuine rather than reactive, that she stood by every question she had asked. She said she had asked them because she believed they needed to be asked. She said she would ask them again. She said the walk-off was his right and she respected his right to exercise it. She said she was glad the conversation had happened even though it had not gone the way she had anticipated and even though the way it had not gone was more interesting than the way she had anticipated it going would have been. She said there were things in what he had said that she was still thinking about. She said this last thing quietly and without elaboration, and it was the most interesting thing she said in the entire conversation after the conversation, because Joy Behar was not someone who admitted to still thinking about things very often. Who was not someone who left spaces in her public discourse for the admission of ongoing uncertainty or the acknowledgement that something she had encountered had left a residue she had not yet fully processed. She said it. And the saying of it was the specific and honest tribute of a woman who had done 30 years of this work and who understood, as people who have done 30 years of this work sometimes understand, that the moments that stay with you are the moments that did not go the way you planned and that required something from you beyond the preparation and the skill and the 30 years of experience, the moments that required the thing underneath all of that. The thing that cannot be built from experience and cannot be faked through skill, the thing that is simply who you are when the structure fails and the real conversation begins. Kanye West walked out of the studio and into the specific and complicated reality of being the person he was in the world that existed outside the studio. The world that did not stop for television segments or resolve itself into the clean structures of a daytime talk show conversation, but that continued in all its difficulty and its complexity and its genuine and unresolvable tension between the things he was and the things he had said and the things those said things had produced in the world. He walked out and the world was still there. Still exactly as difficult as it had been before he sat down across from Joy Behar and tried, in whatever incomplete and imperfect and genuine way he had tried, to explain himself to it. The world did not become simpler because of the conversation. The conversation did not resolve the things that made Kanye West difficult to understand or difficult to defend or difficult to dismiss. It did not produce the clarity that the people who wanted clarity from such moments always hope such moments will produce. It produced something else instead, something that was more valuable than clarity in certain respects and more uncomfortable than clarity in most, which was the specific and honest record of what it looked like when two people who believed things deeply sat across from each other and said what they believed without softening it and without managing it and without any of the protective mechanisms that public discourse usually deploys to make difficult things easier to consume. The record was uncomfortable. The record was real. The record was the kind of television that does not happen very often and that, when it happens, reminds everyone watching why live television, at its best and most genuine and most willing to go somewhere it did not plan to go, is still the most powerful thing that cameras and microphones and a room full of people watching something actually happen have ever been asked to document.